Oh yeah, my dogs wouldn't shut up, so we had to do... The interview had to happen with my dogs in my lab. That was the only way it was going to work, apparently. So,
hello everyone and welcome. It's Seven Sky Spelios here on the Dan's Tunes channel and website. Today we have a very special day. We have a very special music review, band interview. This is Thad McKraken, and there's an upcoming LP this Friday titled
Worlds Within Worlds, Worlds Without End. And it should be out when this comes out on Friday, March 22nd. And it is a psychedelic record which is designed to influence the consciousness of the user by means of kind of hyper maximalist soundscape. And so not your typical release, although there are more straightforward songs and whatnot on it. It is definitely the point of the record is to create a mind frame in the listener which is designed to turn them inwardly and inspire inner imaginal states that can hopefully take them to a higher realm, as is more accustomed with the shamanic religions of yesteryear.
Right. Yeah. So one of my questions is, you definitely have such a cosmic, divine spaciness about your tracks.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the specific techniques that you go into to engineer these worlds?
I have been using a technique called sigil magic for years. It's funny, I've actually, throughout my life, and some people that don't know me, I actually am probably far more known for my writing at this point than I am my music. My music was gaining a little bit of popularity, and weirdly enough, before Black Science ended the first time, we went on kind of indefinite hiatus, kind of right as we released our most popular album. So it's a weird story. The most popular thing I've done as a musician is this album that came out after the band had actually gone on an indefinite hiatus for kind of really, really strange reasons. And right after that, I'd always been writing for a while as well. And what I write about for that site is I've been kind of experimenting with alternate spiritual practices going back nearly since I was like 18 years old. And so the various things that I've tried are astral projection by the techniques of a guy named Robert Monroe. I've tried, of course, psychedelic drugs and the ritualistic use of psychedelic drugs. Psychedelic drugs were honestly what got me interested in this stuff way back in the day, and which really got me into the idea of combining music with psychedelic drugs and how sound can manipulate consciousness. That's probably the first practice that I ever really started taking seriously. And I started doing that when I was like 18, 19 years old. And so I sort of was kind of a weird kid who took psychedelic drugs and then like really zoned out in my own world where I was making this strange music that I wasn't even really at that time like trying to even really play for anybody. It really was just about how do I, use sound to mess with my own head to kind of, reach for the outer realms, as it were. And not realizing at the time that that's a central component to shamanism, like this idea that sound can manipulate consciousness while under the influence of sacred chemicals or not. And I don't want anything to think that you need to be on psychedelic drugs or weed to enjoy that kind of music, but it's definitely designed, kind of with this shamanic intent that you're contacting different allies in the sound. And so, yeah, that's a tenet of shamanic cultures that's been around for thousands of years. So I guess I'm really I think there's obviously been psychedelic musicians for forever, and I'm not like the only one that's tapping into this kind of stuff. There's all kinds of psychedelic music, but it is different because of my interest in things like that, astral projection, ritualistic psychedelic drugs. I've actually done transcendental meditation for years, and also sigil magic, which is a form of kind of inner visualization techniques that you use, which you can kind of use sound to increase your ability to do these inner visualization techniques.
Wow. So obviously music isn't just it's not just about listening to you. It's about being involved in this greater experience.
Absolutely. And I think the culture that we live in, the kind of music I try to make, normally the culture that we live in is designed to kind of, sell a product or amp you up, and not like the music can't do, but the music that I make is definitely designed to turn you inwardly. And there's just kind of an enormous potentiality of the human imagination that is kind of untapped. So the point of my music is really to turn you inwardly and hopefully make you dance too. I mean, there's definitely dance tracks. Dance is a great way of kind of creating ecstatic states of consciousness again, and that roots back to a lot of what we would describe as shamanic or practices of indigenous cultures that have based their religion religion around the idea of using psychedelic sound, psychedelic compounds in tandem with sound for years. So.
Right.
Yeah.
So
so it's an ancient concept that I'm tapping into here. So kind of the opposite of what most bands are, kind of trying to sell booze and just kind of sell this kind of culture of materialism. My music is definitely designed to turn you inwardly and look at the bliss within, as it were, the infinite bliss within.
I'm curious as to who are your influences? Who do you listen to get this similar kind of experience?
Oh yeah, no, lots of bands. I actually wrote a fairly popular blog called Psychoactive Soundscapes, which I was doing yearly top 10 to 15 lists of the best psychedelic albums that I could find. So anybody that actually wants to know what I've been listening to, unfortunately the websites that I wrote those for have since died. So definitely bands that are on the top of my list are Future Sound of London. Yeah, it's good. I mean, there's kind of bands that I put on when I first started smoking pot and taking psychedelics and really getting into music when I was young. There's bands like Future Sound of London and Monster Magnet back in the day, and Caius, and kind of stoner metal like that. And then Meat Beat Manifesto and kind of more the electronic, the genres that I was getting into was the weird electronic stuff combined with the stoner metal-y stuff. And then of course I love shoegaze, classic shoegaze stuff, of course My Bloody Valentine and old Verve albums. And then there's also been a great psychedelic culture. There was for a while in Seattle when Black Science was first active. I haven't been able to find quite as much, but for a while there was amazing bands in Seattle. I've always loved the band Voyager 1. Midday Veil is one of my all-time favorite bands. Great psychedelic band. Rose Windows and Kinski and stuff like that. So there's actually a great tradition of, it's never really been the more popular thing that people have talked about in psychedelic in Seattle, and it's never really been a big thing. But there's always been a scene of people making definitely weird kind of mind manifesting music, and so yeah, I've definitely been influenced by that kind of current as well. Although I think the current has died a little bit. I mean, I think it's just gone more towards electronic music. I think more of the psychedelic music that's been going on in Seattle for the last 4 or 5 years has been definitely more on the electronic front for sure.
Right. Well, it sounds like there's definitely a history.
Yeah.
And that must be exciting to jump into.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully, we can get it more moving.
So I'm curious as to, you're obviously Thad McKraken, but who is Black Science?
Black Science actually started in 2008, and it was me, my brother, a guy named Guile Eichler on the drums, and a guy named Rick Lambert, the Reverend Rick Lambert on bass. And so we played around for about 4 years. Lots of shows, and like I said, unfortunately, we were forced to go on an indefinite hiatus in 2012, right before our second studio album came out, which ended up being the most popular thing that we did. Just a really weird, of course that's the way it works, right?
The balancing act.
Yeah, exactly. I actually was trying to get this project back together because of that, and like I said, I had another guy because I want to play so this is our third album, and this is our third studio album, and we actually even have a lo-fi album before that. So the project right now is just me because I actually had some people that wanted to get Black Science back together, and we're excited about it. So I wrote a few new songs, and then that just completely fell apart. But then I was like, you know what, I'm really enjoying writing songs, so I'm just going to start writing them. So I actually went back to my roots of making, I have a project called Thanaton, which is my kind of electronic project, playing with mostly hardware stuff, drum machines and samplers and stuff. And I've been doing that since I was my taking psychedelic drugs and playing around with samplers, definitely all goes back to me being very young and combining these interests. So weirdly enough, having this rhythm section kind of bail on me when I started trying to revive Black Science led me to making an album by myself and getting back to my roots of using samplers and drum machines.
You're obviously very knowledgeable when it comes to how the spiritual relates to music and these ideas about magic and shamanism. And how does that influence you while you write? Let's talk about, more specifically, creative blocks. How do you approach these issues?
That's actually a really good question. So I played in a very angry political I call it metaphysical rant metal, I suppose, band in the early 2000s. And what's fun is it was during the Bush administration too. So like it was like I played in a very, and it's bizarre because it wasn't really, I moved to Seattle, I really wanted to play in a band, and and that's just what I found, it's not everybody just wants to play your music, right?
Right.
And so I really wanted to play in a band when I moved to Seattle, and so it took me, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years to finally find the right project, and that was it. And that wasn't, I wanted to be making weird psychedelic music, they wanted to be playing kind of math metal stuff. So there was this kind of compromise, and we played this very metaphysical rant metal, as they call it. It was kind of a combination of like At the Drive-In and Bad Religion or something.
Wow.
And in that project, I was really focused on, it really helped with my writing really enough, because all I was doing in that project really was writing lyrics, and I would add some keyboard lines. So it was really all about vocals and lyrics, and so it was really cerebral, and I used to like read a lot of books and then take like notes and make word lists and be like, oh, that's a cool phrase, I want to throw that into lyrics. And so it was a very cerebral process. And then when I started Black Science, I kind of realized like I'm going to do the exact opposite. And so rather than really like overthinking these kind of things, I'm honestly just going to write music and then just kind of be like, you know what comes to me, like what feels easy and what just like comes out of me when I go down to write this. So it was a far more intuitive songwriting process. So really on a general level, it's more just kind of opening myself up to when it feels like the right time to be working on stuff, and just working from a more intuitive level, not just on lyric writing, but also in as far as just the music. But I do have a couple really interesting stories about really specific, like me putting myself in trance states, and then having the music kind of that I wanted to make dictated to me in a quite specific way. One is on this record. So I was meditating one day, and this idea of, it was just kind of like reminded to me that I really love this keyboard part in the Primal Scream song Kowalski. So there's this cool kind of delay keyboard riff in the Primal Scream song Kowalski. And while I was meditating, it was just like, oh hey, you like remember how you like that? How you've always thought that part was cool? And then I kind of forgot about that. And then I was working on the song in the studio with Dean, who engineered the record. And out of nowhere, I was like, oh yeah, I had that thing that happened when I meditated, where it reminded me of this part in the song that I've always liked. And so because of that, I threw in the studio, I wrote kind of on a fly a keyboard part that I thought was kind of like that, and it's in the song Eternity Beckons. And then after the fact, that ended up becoming like one of my favorite parts on the record. And
Wow.
and I actually work on something, I was talking about a thing called sigil magic earlier, which is
Right.
which is really all about kind of envisioning. It's really about using your mind's eye. It's more focused on visualizing these images. And I definitely it's interesting in our language, there's not even a word for, like, you can say visualize, and like, what's the best word for envisioning sound, like there's not even great language for it. So like kind of just trying to imagine sound and think in sound. And it's pretty interesting in my meditative state. So like one of this part that I was sort of told to write in this, kind of meditative state of consciousness ended up being this thing that I actually end up using and focusing on and kind of envisioning in my head more than any of the other parts in the album. There's another really completely weird story on that front, on Black Science's last album, where we recorded on the song called The State of the Art, we recorded an extended jam at the end of that song. And I wanted to cut the jam off, and the other guys in the band liked some of the stuff that we did, so they wanted to keep it to make it last another minute and a half or something like that, or maybe it was like 2 minutes of the jam went on. I was like, I don't know, I think the album flows better if we cut that. So I caved to them. I'm like, you guys are sure. You guys want the extra 2 minutes to jam? We'll keep the extra 2 minutes to jam, sure. Then when I went into the studio to make, so a few days before I was mastering it in the studio with my friend Kevin, who was also my pot dealer at the time. This is before weed was legalized. So I was mastering with my friend Kevin, and so a day or so before, I had this kind of vision in a kind of hypnagogic state of consciousness where I was shown that there was some kind of, it would just involve there being some kind of glitch in the tape. It's like there was going to be some kind of glitch in the tape. And so then when we were mastering in the studio, there was a glitch in the tape right around the segment of where we had where I wanted to fade it out. So on this exact song, it was like, well, if we don't fade it out exactly where I want to, there's a weird electronic glitch that comes in and makes it sound terrible. Ultimately, really bizarre thing where I was actually like, I got my way, that like I caved to the guys in the band, and somehow there was, and like even talked to like Kevin, and like this guy's a pro, like he does mastering all the time, and he was just like, I don't know what to tell you. There's a weird glitch there. I can't get rid of it. There's nothing that we can do. So all I can really do is cut it out. So the song ended up like being edited the way I wanted to, rather than the way band did, because of a weird phantom glitch. Wow. And I had a vision about that glitch a couple days before it happened. It was like I had a weird, and like the vision didn't make any sense. I'm like, weird glitch? Like, what are you talking about? But what's fascinating about this is also that sounds weird, but I've studied a lot of stuff. Another thing that I've really been fascinated in is remote viewing. And so this idea of having like precognitive thoughts like that, there's actually, a decent amount of evidence, and that I've replicated myself, that people have these kind of abilities. I know that a lot of people that are hearing that kind of think that's crazy. And even me, when something like that happens, you have a weird precognitive experience, it seems strange. But there's a decent amount of increasing evidence that consciousness works in this way, and we have these kind of abilities to perceive things before they happen.
Quite a train. Quite a train you're taking us on right now. You kind of touched on earlier that your lyric writing has changed throughout the years.
Yeah.
And would you say that you're more or less focused on it? And what is your intellectual approach versus spiritual approach to writing lyrics specifically?
Yeah, well, it has become a more spiritual approach, and yeah, you're right. I mean, in my previous band, I mean, it was very intellectual, and it was definitely a very, I'm gonna write lyrics that I think are clever and witty, and it's become a far more intuitive approach. And what I found about that, what's interesting about that, when I've been doing it from a more intuitive approach like that oftentimes I don't really understand the meaning of the lyrics until after the fact, which is pretty. And you're right. I mean, some of it. There is a certain, a lot of the fundamental core of a lot of meditative practices really is that. It's getting yourself to the point where there's a part of you that's larger than yourself. So your mind is becoming sort of a blank slate. And this is like hopefully what I create with my music. It definitely works on me, and hopefully it works on others, is where you're creating this kind of state of consciousness where sometimes like your normal thought process turning off, and then something else that is higher, that is connected to a larger part of the universe, is now taking control of the scene and kind of coming up with this stuff rather than you. And so it is weird. So a lot of times when I have been writing lyrics like that, I look at them after the fact and I'm like, oh, well, that's what I was writing about. Like, it makes sense. Like, there's so, you really do get to that state where it seems like something larger than you is kind of putting the lyrics together, and then, it's kind of coming through them, and it doesn't even make sense to you while you're doing it, and it makes sense kind of after the fact. I think the concept of worlds within worlds without end, it just, even when you look at the world on kind of a material level, like you're sort of in your own reality, my dogs are in their own reality, like they're like, even on that level, if you really take into account others people's consciousness as existing, rather than reducing the idea of the world into just a material realm, which we kind of all do all day, every day, to tell ourselves a narrative that makes sense because we can't process that. But the second, even in that day, when you start really thinking about other people's inner worlds as existing, all of a sudden, our world becomes worlds within worlds, like 1 billion different realities, 10 billion different realities, or however many, rather than just this one world that you can understand. It suddenly becomes this completely infinite, kind of interconnected storyline. For sure. So yeah. So I was sort of writing lyrics about the concept, but I wasn't even really consciously thinking about that. That's what this album was about, and that's some of the concepts that are in this album. Wasn't really, when you sort of start writing from a perspective like, it's interesting. Like ended up like coming up with ideas of your music starts being about what it's supposed to be about, I suppose.
There seems to be real freedom in letting yourself go.
Yeah.
Not overthinking what you're doing.
That also doesn't mean that I don't. Like, sometimes if I come up with something I think it's stupid, I change it too. I'm not like completely just going with whatever my first impulse is. If there's something I'm like, okay, that's stupid, I do actually hone this stuff. But it's definitely a far more intuitive process than like, I used to, I don't know if you're familiar with like bands like Bad Religion or At the Drive-In or Mars Volta that have those really complicated lyrics. Yeah, I totally used to write lyrics like that when I was younger. Absolutely.
You've obviously been in the midst of a quote-unquote full band setting.
Yeah.
And you've obviously had a fair dose of your own, in your own closet, in your own world, making your music. So what do you think are the big kind of compromises you make when you're working with others, or what are the pros and cons with both of those worlds?
That's a great question, because this album that I made, this is the first actual kind of like more rock-ish project that I've made just by myself, and the disadvantages is absolutely like, it's fun to hang out with other people and get together. Music is it can be almost as much of a social experience as a creative experience, and so for years of playing in bands, it was always part art project, part social club, and it's always good to get out and hang out with people, and so that's positive. Bands like the Nemesis Theory that I worked in, it kind of depends on the project. That band, there was a lot of artistic compromise in that band, which I wasn't really happy about. Like I said, I wanted to make really weird psychedelic music. They wanted to make kind of math rock. So we kind of compromised and we made this kind of weird blend of the two. That was limiting, but Black Science, when it was me, before our previous two albums, was really, I was still writing everything, but I wasn't writing anybody else's part. So there's a social element, and I still listen to our previous two albums, and I'm like, I have to concede, like, I didn't write, they were my songs and everything, but a lot of the cool parts that were on there, I didn't write, they came up with. So there's a lot of fun in working in that kind of environment. The advantages of working by yourself, though, one, I am probably the weirdest guy in the band, so if, I was the one writing all the music, it was really my concept anyways. Like, that band, Black Science, was always sort of my brainchild. It could have been called, like, the Thad McKraken experience or whatever. but so it was always my brainchild. So, giving you a little more creative control makes it maybe even a little weirder than it would have been otherwise, So, yeah, it's nice to do a bit of both, and yeah, it's working on a whole album, like, kind of Trent Reznor style or whatever was definitely... I hadn't really done that, but I'll probably do more of it in the future for sure.
Right. Well, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
has been Thad McKraken of Black Science.
Black Science, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, check us out. Worlds Within Worlds, Worlds Within Worlds, Worlds Without End. It should be out everywhere by the time you watch this on all the streaming services and whatnot.
This has been Seven Sky Spelios at Dan's Tunes.